The golden glow of Lumiere Atlanta's crown jewel of fine dining spilled across the dining room like honey poured from a crystal jar, catching the edges of polished silverware and making the chandeliers overhead shimmer like captured stars. The soft, mournful strains of a violin quartet drifted through the air, weaving between the clink of wine glasses and the low hum of polite conversation. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided silently, their movements as choreographed as a ballet, delivering plates of seared scallops and truffle-dusted risotto to tables draped in linen so pristine it seemed to glow. At table 12, tucked into a shadowed corner near the frosted glass partition, a woman in a beige coat sat stiffly, her posture betraying a quiet panic. Her eyes, wide and darting, scanned the room for an escape that wasn't there. 3 men in tailored black suits pressed close around her, their chairs angled to box her in their voices low and sharp, like knives wrapped in velvet. The biggest one, a broad-shouldered man with a jaw like a slab of granite, leaned forward, his smile thin and predatory. "Let's have a private conversation," he said, pulling out a chair with a deliberate scrape that cut through the restaurant's hum, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Across the room, at the polished mahogany bar, Evan Brooks stood like a shadow in a world of light. At 35, he was a man of quiet routines, his dark skin and oil-stained work jacket marking him as an outsider in this temple of wealth. An industrial maintenance technician, Evan fixed the invisible machinery that kept places like Lumiere running, commercial kitchen equipment, gas sensors, automatic doors. Always after hours, always unseen. His hands, calloused from years of wielding wrenches and soldering irons, clutched a clipboard filled with maintenance orders, each line a small battle against entropy. Tonight, he wasn't supposed to be here, not in the dining room, not among the elite. But a last-minute scheduling conflict had brought him to Lumiere to finalize the next morning's kitchen repair list. And he'd brought his 7-year-old daughter, Amara, along. She sat at a small table near the emergency exit, her small frame hunched over a stack of napkins she was folding into delicate paper cranes, her tongue poking out in concentration. Amara had a ritual every morning. She'd slip one of those cranes into Evan's work jacket pocket. "For safe travels, Daddy," she'd say, her voice bright as sunlight. Then she'd tie a red thread around his wrist, her tiny fingers careful and precise. "So you remember to breathe slow when things get scary." That red thread was there now, soft cotton, brushing against his pulse, grounding him as he stood in Lumiere's golden haze, an anchor in a sea of opulence. Evan's presence drew glances, some subtle, some not. To the diners in their $1,000 suits and silk dresses, he was part of the furniture, a fleeting inconvenience in their curated world. The maitre d', a wiry man with a pencil mustache and a practiced smile, had already made his disapproval clear. "Maintenance areas are through the back," he'd said, his eyes lingering on Evan's worn jacket. The faint oil stains, a silent accusation. "The bar is for paying customers." Evan had nodded, used to the treatment. He'd spent years fading into the background, his work keeping restaurants and hotels humming while he remained invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. It let him see things others missed, like the grease-caked sprinkler head above the flambe station, a fire hazard waiting to happen, or the emergency exit door that stuck when it closed, its mechanism grinding faintly audible to Evan's trained ear from 20 feet away. He snapped photos with his phone, a habit born from years of saving clients from health department fines. Each image was a small act of vigilance, a way to hold the world accountable for its overlooked dangers. 3 years ago, Evan had learned the cost of those dangers the hard way. His wife Lena had died in a boarding house fire, trapped in a building owned by Sterling Properties, of a real estate giant that cut every safety corner to maximize profit. Cheap wiring, No working sprinklers, exit doors bolted shut to prevent theft. Evan could still smell the smoke in his nightmares, still hear the sirens that came too late. Since then, he'd seen danger in every neglected detail, every shortcut taken for a quick buck. It was why he'd brought Amara tonight, despite the late hour. She was his compass, her presence a reminder to stay grounded, to keep moving forward. As he reviewed his notes, his eyes drifted to her table, where she was folding another crane, her small hands steady. She caught his gaze and pressed both palms against the table, their secret signal, "I'm watching you, Daddy." Evan smiled, tucking a cracked porcelain spoon from the bar setup into his palm. It was a nervous habit from another life, a time when he'd needed something to fidget with, to keep his hands steady in high-stakes moments. The spoon's hairline fracture caught the light, a fragile thing that felt oddly comforting. Then, his attention shifted, drawn to table 12, like a magnet. The three men weren't just talking to the woman, they were orchestrating a scene. Their chairs were positioned with precision, blocking the overhead security camera's view. The biggest man wore a single wireless earpiece, his left sleeve bulging with the outline of something heavy, definitely not a phone. The woman whose name tag read N. Carter sat with her hands flat on the table, her posture screaming, "Flight or fight." Evan's years of training kicked in instincts he'd tried to bury after Lena's death. Before Amara, before the fire, he'd worked for Apex Solutions, a diplomatic security firm training operatives in nonviolent conflict resolution. He'd been the best writing manuals on de-escalation, teaching men and women how to diffuse situations without throwing a punch. But after Lena, he'd walked away, choosing wrenches over words, a quiet life of fixing broken things instead of broken situations. Yet some instincts never faded. He watched the men exchange glances, subtle hand signals passing between them like a coded language. They'd positioned themselves to cut off her escape routes, main exit, secondary exit near the restrooms, even the path to the bar. The woman wasn't here by choice. Evan's grip tightened on the spoon, its fracture pressing into his palm. He glanced back at Amara, her eyes still on him, her hands paused, mid-fold. The restaurant hummed with its own rhythm, clinking silverware, murmured laughter, the violin's wistful melody, but to Evan it was all white noise. His focus narrowed to table 12, to the woman's desperate glances, to the men's calculated menace. He stood, the red thread pulling taut against his wrist, and walked toward the table. The air thickened with each step, the violin's notes suddenly too delicate for the tension coiling in the room. Diners glanced up, their curiosity piqued by the man in the work jacket striding purposefully through their gilded world. Evan stopped at table 12, placing himself between the woman and the biggest man. "She doesn't want to talk," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying the weight of someone who'd learned to make words matter. "Back off." The big man laughed, a sound like gravel crunching underfoot. "Who are you in this fancy place, kitchen repair guy?" He gestured at Evan's jacket, the oil stains a stark contrast to his own pristine suit. His companions snickered, their eyes gleaming with amusement. Nearby diners looked up, some smirking at the obvious class divide, others whispering behind their hands. "I don't know them," the woman said, her voice trembling but firm. Her name tag, now fully visible, read Nadia Carter. Evan angled the cracked spoon in his hand, using its curve to catch the reflection behind him. The third man had shifted quietly, blocking the secondary exit near the restrooms. They had her completely surrounded, a textbook intimidation setup. The restaurant manager appeared at Evan's shoulder, his smile strained, his eyes darting nervously. "Sir, please maintain decorum," he said, his voice dripping with forced politeness. "These are VIP guests, enjoying their meal." Evan's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The manager's watch was on the wrong wrist, a fresh tan line betraying a recent switch. Ink stains on his cuff suggested he'd signed something in a hurry. Someone had gotten to him, bought his silence, or his cooperation. Evan kept his voice steady loud enough for nearby tables to hear. VIP guests who block camera angles and position themselves at exit points. He nodded toward the ceiling where a discreet security camera was mounted. Professional positioning. Makes people wonder what kind of conversation needs that level of privacy. A woman at the next table had her phone out, live streaming to her followers. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the violin. "Some maintenance guy thinks he's a hero." Nervous laughter rippled through the dining room, a few diners shaking their heads. Someone called out, "Leave them alone, bro. Mind your business." The big man stood towering over Evan and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Smart guys know when to walk away," he said, his voice a low growl. Evan shifted his weight subtly, redirecting the pressure point, a move so smooth it looked accidental. The red thread caught the light as he breathed slowly, Amara's voice echoing in his mind. "Breathe slow when things get scary." He met the man's gaze. "The lady said she doesn't know you," he repeated, his voice carrying further now, drawing more eyes. "The cameras you're blocking would back that up." Cameras. The man's grip tightened, his eyes narrowing. "What cameras?" Evan tilted his head toward the ceiling. "Overhead, security. You've got it covered from your seating arrangement. Textbook setup." He let the words hang, watching the man's expression flicker. The live streaming woman zoomed in, her follower count ticking upward. "This is escalating," someone murmured, their voice tinged with excitement. Nadia looked at Evan, her eyes wide with something like recognition. Did you work with Apex Solutions?" The big man's attention snapped to her, then back to Evan. "What the hell is Apex Solutions?" he demanded, but the seed was planted. Nadia knew something about Evan's past, and now the room was listening, the air charged with anticipation. The manager tried to intervene again, his voice tight. "Perhaps we could move this discussion, no." The big man snapped his fingers, and his companions moved closer, their movements synchronized. "We're finishing this conversation right here." One reached for Nadia's purse, his hand darting forward. She pulled it back instinctively, clutching it to her chest. "Give us what we came for," the big man said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Make this easy." "I don't have anything," Nadia protested, her voice shaking but defiant. "USB drive. Documents. Everything you took from the Sterling files." Evan's blood turned to ice. Sterling Properties. The name hit like a punch to the gut. The company that owned the boarding house where Lena died, the company that bribed inspectors, ignored safety codes, and let tenants burn for profit margins. This wasn't a random shakedown. It was connected to the fire, to Lena, to everything Evan had tried to leave behind. His hand tightened on the cracked spoon, the fracture biting into his palm. Across the room, Amara pressed her palms against her table, her eyes locked on him. The red thread pulled taut against his wrist, a lifeline to his daughter's faith in him. The restaurant held its breath, the violin's melody absurdly cheerful against the rising tension. Evan's next move would decide whether this ended quietly or if everything was about to go sideways. The air in Lumiere's dining room crackled with tension, the golden glow of chandeliers casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the moment. The violin quartet's melody, once a soothing backdrop, now felt like a mocking counterpoint to the scene unfolding at table 12. Nadia Carter clutched her purse, her knuckles white, as the biggest of the three men in black suits leaned closer, his voice a low growl. the USB drive. Now, don't make this harder than it needs to be. His companions shifted one, blocking the secondary exit, near the restrooms, the other inching toward her, their movements synchronized like predators circling prey. Evan Brooks stood between them and Nadia, his oil-stained work jacket, a stark contrast to the polished elegance around him. The cracked porcelain spoon in his hand glinted under the chandelier light, its fracture catching his eye as he breathed slowly. The red thread around his wrist, a quiet reminder of his daughter. Amara's words, "Breathe slow when things get scary." Across the room, Amara sat at her table near the emergency exit. Her small hands paused mid-fold on a paper crane, her eyes locked on her father. The restaurant's hum, clinking silverware, whispered conversations had faded to a hush, every diner's gaze drawn to the standoff. A woman at a nearby table held her phone aloft, live streaming her voice, a breathless whisper. "This maintenance guy's about to get himself killed." Evan's past flickered in his mind like a half-forgotten film reel. Before Amara, before the fire that took his wife Lena, he'd been someone else. A trainer at Apex Solutions, a diplomatic security firm where he taught operatives how to defuse crises without violence. He'd written the book on nonviolent conflict resolution, literally his manual used by embassies and private security firms across the globe. But after Lena's death in a boarding house fire caused by Sterling Properties' negligence, he'd walked away. He'd traded high-stakes negotiations for wrenches and work orders, choosing to fix broken machines instead of broken situations. Yet here he was, instincts flaring, the old training kicking in like muscle memory. The big man's hand was still on his shoulder, heavy and threatening. "Walk away, repair guy," he said, his smile ablade. "This ain't your fight." Evan's voice was steady, loud enough to carry. "The lady said she doesn't know you." "That makes it my business." He angled the spoon, using its curve as a makeshift mirror to track the third man's position by the restroom exit. The man's hand hovered near his jacket, likely reaching for something concealed. Evan's mind raced, calculating angles, pressure points, and exits. He'd trained for this situations where words could fail, where action had to be precise. The live-streaming woman's follower count ticked upward, her camera catching every move. "This is insane," she murmured, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's calling them out." Nadia's eyes met Evan's, a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "You're Evan Brooks, aren't you? From Apex Solutions." The name hit like a spark in dry grass. The big man's head snapped toward her. Apex. What he demanded, but Evan saw the shift in his posture, uncertainty creeping in. Nadia pressed on, her voice shaking but clear. "I'm a journalist. Metro Weekly. I've been investigating Sterling Properties' financial records, safety violations, bribery trails. That's why they're here." She clutched her purse tighter, her words spilling out like a confession. "The USB drive in here, it's got everything. Proof they've been cutting corners for years, bribing city inspectors, rigging safety reports." Evan's heart thudded, the name Sterling Properties searing through him. The boarding house fire that killed Lena, cheap wiring, no sprinklers, exits chained shut, was no accident. Sterling had built an empire on slums, profiting off tenants' desperation while dodging every regulation. This wasn't just Nadia's fight. It was personal. The big man's eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said to Nadia, then turned to Evan. "And you're nobody. Fix your pipes and leave the grown-up problems to us." The restaurant manager, his watch still on the wrong wrist, tried to intervene, his voice tight with panic. "Sir, please, let's take this to the office." Evan cut him off, his tone calm but firm. Stay where you are, manager. You've got ink on your cuff and a tan line from a switched watch. Signed something recently, didn't you? The manager froze, his face paling. The live-streaming woman gasped, her phone shaking. Oh my God, he's reading the manager like a book. Comments flooded her screen. This guy's a detective? Plot twist. Call the cops. Evan pulled out his phone, set it to speaker, and dialed 911, never taking his eyes off the big man. Atlanta PD. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice crackled. Lumiere Restaurant downtown. Evan said loud enough for the room to hear. 3 men intimidating a woman, blocking exits and avoiding security cameras. One's armed left sleeve non-phone object. I'm holding the situation until you arrive. The big man's smile vanished. You're calling the cops? He snarled, lunging forward, his hand aiming for Evan's throat, a classic intimidation grab meant to end things fast. Evan moved faster. He sidestepped, twisting the cracked spoon to press its sharp edge against the pressure point between the man's radius and ulna bones. Not hard enough to break anything, just enough to send a jolt of numbness through his hand. The man gasped, his arm dropping uselessly, his face twisting in shock. What the he started, but Evan was already moving. He grabbed a cloth napkin from the nearest table setting, twisted it into a rope, and looped it around the second man's wrist as he reached for Nadia's purse. A gentle pull, a step to the side, and the man's arm was tethered to the chair leg, the napkin acting as a soft restraint. The third man, caught off guard, reached into his jacket, but Evan was ready. He snatched a roll of thermal receipt paper from a nearby payment terminal. The long, curling kind restaurants always overprinted, and bound the man's thumb to his index finger in 3 quick moves. Pain compliance, Evans said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Apply pressure here, and the hand stops moving. The dining room was silent except for the violin, its cheerful notes absurd against the scene. The live stream exploded, viewer count surging past 10,000. Comments flooded in. Is this guy a ninja? He just zip-tied a dude with a napkin. This is better than Netflix. Nadia stared at Evan, her eyes as wide. You're the Evan Brooks, Apex Solutions lead instructor. You wrote the Calm First Manual, Nonviolent De-Escalation for Diplomatic Security. The big man, still shaking, feeling back into his numb hand, froze. What's she talking about? Nadia's journalistic instincts took over. Evan Brooks trained operatives to handle high-risk situations without violence. He was the best, until he disappeared after the Sterling Properties fire. She turned to Evan, her voice softening. Your wife, Lena. She died in that boarding house, didn't she? Sterling's negligence, faulty wiring, no sprinklers. That's why you're here. The room erupted in whispers. Diners leaned forward, phones out recording every word. The live stream hit 20,000 viewers. Sterling Properties, a man at table 6 muttered. The real estate company that got sued for unsafe housing. The pieces were clicking together, the story spreading like wildfire. Evan's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on the men. This isn't about me, he said. It's about her. He nodded at Nadia. And what she's got in that purse. The big man, recovering, sneered. You think you're some hero? You're a nobody with a wrench. He nodded to his companions, who strained against their makeshift restraints. This changes nothing. Hand over the drive, lady, or what? Evan interrupted, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the room. The police are 2 minutes out. Your positioning, your earpiece, your blocked cameras, it's all on record. He held up his phone. The call still active. The dispatcher's voice faintly audible. Units are approaching, sir. Stay on the line. Evan's eyes flicked to Amara, who touched her chest, their signal for breathe deep, stay calm. He rolled the spoon between his fingers, feeling its fracture, a fragile tool that had become an extension of his will. The big man lunged again, this time aiming for Nadia's purse. Evan moved like water, fluid and precise. He twisted the napkin around the man's other wrist, tethering it to the table leg, then pressed the spoon's edge against a nerve point in his elbow. The man collapsed back into his chair, cursing under his breath. The second man, still struggling with the napkin restraint, shouted, "You're dead, man." The third, his thumb bound, was starting to panic. "I can't feel my fingers." "Stop fighting it," Evan said calmly. "The technique's reversible if you stay still." He turned to Nadia. "Ma'am, what's on that drive?" She hesitated, then spoke, her voice steadying. "Financial records. Proof Sterling Properties bribed city inspectors for a decade. Fire safety violations, electrical code breaches, housing standard failures. They've been running slums, calling them affordable housing, including the boarding house where—" She paused, meeting Evan's gaze. "Where your wife died." The words hit like a sledgehammer, but Evan didn't flinch. The red thread on his wrist caught the light as he breathed slowly, Amara's voice in his mind. The live stream viewer count hit 30,000 comments screaming, "This is personal. Sterling's going down." "Who is this guy?" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The manager, now sweating visibly, tried to slip toward the kitchen, but Evan's voice stopped him cold. "Stay put. You're on the call too." He showed the phone screen call duration, 9 minutes, 12 seconds. Everything's recorded. The police burst through the front entrance, tasers drawn, their boots heavy on the polished floor. "Hands up," the lead officer barked, taking in the scene. 3 men in various states of restraint. Nadia clutching her purse. Evan standing calmly in the center, and 30 diners with phones out, recording. "Someone want to explain?" the officer asked. Nadia stood holding up the USB drive. "I'm Nadia Carter, Metro Weekly. These men tried to steal evidence related to my investigation into Sterling Properties. This man," she nodded at Evan, "stopped them. His name's Evan Brooks." The officer's eyebrows rose. "Brooks, the Apex Solutions guy?" Evan shook his head. "Former instructor. Current father." From across the room, Amara's voice rang out, clear and proud. "That's my daddy!" The dining room erupted in applause, the sound swelling like a wave. The live stream hit 40,000 viewers, comments flooding. "Hero dad wrong. Table wrong day, iconic Sterling's toast." The police cuffed the 3 men who muttered curses as they were led out. Nadia turned to Evan, her eyes grateful but searching. "Why'd you step in? You didn't have to." Evan glanced at Amara, who was folding another crane, her small face beaming. "Because someone had to," he said simply, "and I was here." As the officers cleared the scene, reporters began calling, their voicemails piling up on Evan's phone. The video was going viral, clips of "wrong table wrong" day gentlemen spreading across social media. But Evan ignored the buzz, walking back to Amara's table. She handed him a new paper crane, her eyes bright. "You fixed it, Daddy." He slipped the crane into his pocket, the red thread warm against his wrist. The fight wasn't over. Sterling Properties was bigger than 3 thugs in a restaurant, but for tonight, he'd kept someone safe. That was enough. The morning after the confrontation at Lumiere, Evan Brooks woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly, a swarm of notifications lighting up the screen. News outlets, CNN, NBC, local Atlanta stations wanted interviews. Social media platforms were ablaze with clips of his calm takedown of three corporate fixers. The phrase, "wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen," trending across the country. The live stream from that night had ballooned to 5 million views, with comments ranging from "Hero Dad" to "Sterling Properties is done for." Evan silenced the phone and turned to his daughter Amara, who was already at the kitchen table, folding a paper crane from a cereal box cutout. "Daddy, you're famous," she said, her 7-year-old voice half teasing, half proud, as she tied a fresh red thread around his wrist. For safe travels and breathing slow, she added, her eyes serious. Evan smiled, tucking the crane into his work jacket pocket. Fame wasn't his goal. Keeping Amara safe and their life steady was. But the world had other plans, and the ripple effect of that night at Lumiere was just beginning to spread. By noon, Evan's small apartment in East Atlanta was a quiet fortress against the chaos outside. Reporters camped on the street, their vans clogging the block. A local news anchor knocked on his door, offering a live interview. "Mr. Brooks, you're a hero to millions," she said, her smile polished for the camera. Evan shook his head, polite but firm. "I'm just a dad who fixes things. No story here." He closed the door, his focus on Amara's homework math worksheets and a book report on Charlotte's Web. But the world wouldn't let him fade back into invisibility. By evening, his inbox was flooded with job offers. Corporate security firms, private investigation agencies, even a diplomatic security contractor who remembered his work at Apex Solutions. One email from David Park at Meridian Security stood out: 6-figure salary, full benefits. "Your nonviolent techniques are exactly what high-end clients need, media-friendly, defensible. Name your terms." Evan leaned back in his chair, the red thread catching the light. He'd left Apex after Lena's death, trading high-stakes work for the quiet rhythm of maintenance calls for being home by 3:30 to pick Amara up from school. Could he go back to that world without losing what mattered most? The answer came from Amara. "Daddy, are you going to be on TV?" she asked, her pencil pausing over a subtraction problem. "Or are you still going to fix stuff?" Evan ruffled her hair. "Fixing stuff's my thing, kiddo. Gotta be there for your school plays, right?" She grinned, handing him another crane. "For fixing things." Evan typed a reply to Park, part-time consulting only. Home by 3:30 daily. No weekends, no travel, over 8 hours. Park's response was immediate, unusual. "But we can work with that. Contract to follow." Evan signed on as a safety consultant, training restaurants and hotels in de-escalation and risk assessment work that let him stay invisible, useful, and present for Amara. Meanwhile, Nadia Carter's exposé on Sterling Properties hit like a thunderclap. Her Metro Weekly article, published 3 days after the Lumiere incident, detailed a decade of corruption, doctored safety reports, bribed city inspectors, and slums marketed as affordable housing. The USB drive she'd protected contained financial records, emails, and signed agreements proving Sterling's executives knowingly violated fire codes, electrical standards, and housing regulations. The boarding house where Lena died was one of dozens each, a ticking time bomb of negligence. The article sparked a federal investigation, with the FBI raiding Sterling's downtown offices within a week. Social media amplified the story, hashtags like #JusticeForLena and a wrong table trending alongside clips of Evan's confrontation. The public outcry was relentless, with protests outside Sterling's headquarters demanding accountability. Nadia's byline became a household name, her face on every news channel, but she always credited Evan. "Without him, I wouldn't be here," she told a primetime interviewer. He saw what no one else did. Evan, though, avoided the spotlight. He took Amara to school each morning, the red thread on his wrist, a quiet anchor as he navigated the media frenzy. Reporters followed him to job sites, but he waved them off, his focus on the work, checking gas lines, testing sprinklers, ensuring emergency exits opened smoothly. The memories of Lena haunted him, her laugh, her warmth, the way she'd dance with Amara in their tiny kitchen. The fire had taken her, but Sterling's greed had lit the match. Helping Nadia felt like a step toward justice, but it didn't fill the hole Lena left. At night, he'd sit with Amara reading her stories, or helping her fold cranes, each one a small act of healing. "Mommy would like these, right?" Amara asked once, holding up a crane made from a pizza box. Evan nodded, his throat tight. "She'd love them, sweetheart." A week after the incident, Lumiere's new manager, Patricia Wells, called Evan. "Mr. Brooks, we need you," she said, her voice nervous. "We want to make things right. Safety, security, everything. Can you help?" Evan agreed, walking back into Lumiere's golden dining room with his clipboard and a new red thread from Amara. The irony wasn't lost on him, returning to the place where he'd become a viral hero to fix what he'd always fixed: broken systems. Patricia, promoted from assistant after the previous manager's firing, was eager to rebuild trust. "We're getting killed online," she admitted. "Yelp reviews call us a crime scene. We need a safety overhaul." Evan spent days auditing the restaurant, clearing stuck exit doors, repositioning security cameras, and installing panic buttons at every table. He trained the staff in what he called the calm first protocol: recognize distress, prioritize customer safety, document everything, and de-escalate without ego. "It's not about being a hero," he told the servers during a training session. "It's about seeing what's wrong and acting before it escalates." The training paid off faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks later, a young server named Mia approached Evan during a follow-up inspection. "Mr. Brooks, there's a situation at table 9, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A man's bothering a woman dining alone." She asked him to leave, but he won't. Evan glanced across the dining room. A different man, a different woman, but the same dynamics: entitlement, intimidation, disregard. He could step in, repeat the moves that had gone viral, but that wasn't the point. He'd trained the staff to handle this. "What's the protocol?" he asked Mia. "Calm." "First," she replied, "notify management, activate the panic button document with the camera, and keep the customer safe." Evan nodded. "Do it." Mia moved with quiet confidence, alerting Patricia, who signaled security. A guard approached the man, speaking calmly but firmly, while Mia discreetly recorded the interaction on a restaurant tablet. The woman, visibly relieved, was escorted to a safer table, her meal comped. The man was removed without a scene. No drama, no live stream, just professionalism. Evan watched from the bar, the red thread warm against his wrist. "Good work," he told Mia later. She beamed. "Learned it from you." Lumiere's reputation began to recover. Online reviews shifted from Assault Central to Safest Place to Dine in Atlanta. The restaurant leaned into the narrative, unofficially branding itself the place where heroes are born. Evan found it ironic, but didn't argue it meant fewer emergencies, safer spaces. He kept consulting training staff at other restaurants and hotels, each job a small step toward a world where people like Lena wouldn't die because of someone else's greed. But the media wouldn't let him go. Talk shows called Daily Jimmy Fallon's team offered to fly him and Amara to New York. "Daddy, they want you to be famous." Amara giggled, handing him a crane folded from a newspaper's entertainment section. "I told them, you're not a TV person. You're a fixing things person." Evan laughed, slipping the crane into his pocket. Smart kid. At home, Evan struggled with the weight of it all. The viral video had dug up memories of Lena of the fire of the life he'd left behind at Apex. He'd been good at that work, too good, maybe. Teaching operatives to stay calm in chaos, to control a room without a weapon, had felt like a calling. But after Lena, it felt hollow. Fixing machines was simpler, cleaner. Machines didn't lie or bribe or burn. Yet Nadia's USB drive now, in the hands of federal prosecutors, was doing what he couldn't back then, holding Sterling accountable. The investigation was gaining steam with subpoenas issued to Sterling's CEO and board members. Evan didn't watch the news, but Amara would sometimes catch him up, her voice bright as she read headlines off her tablet. "They're in big trouble, Daddy, because of you and the lady with the purse." One evening, as Evan helped Amara with her spelling words, she looked up, her eyes serious. "Daddy, are you sad about Mommy?" The question caught him off guard, the red thread pulling taut as he set down his pen. "Every day, sweetheart," he admitted. "But you make it better, you and your cranes." Amara hugged him, her small arms fierce. "You make things better, too, like at the restaurant." Evan held her close, the weight of the past lighter for a moment. He wasn't a hero, not in his own eyes, just a man trying to keep the world from breaking apart around the people he loved. Lumiere's changes were a quiet victory, but the real fight was still ahead. Sterling Properties wasn't just a company. It was a machine of its own with deep pockets and deeper connections. Nadia's investigation had rattled them, but they wouldn't go down easily. Evan knew this, felt it in the way the job offers kept coming, some with a hint of pressure, a subtle suggestion to stay quiet. He ignored them, focusing on his work on Amara, on the small, steady acts of fixing what was broken. The red thread on his wrist, replaced daily by Amara, was a reminder that courage didn't always mean fighting. It meant showing up, seeing clearly, and doing what was right, even when the world tried to look the other way. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood like a monolith under the morning sun, its marble steps swarming with reporters, camera crews, and protesters, clutching signs that read, "Justice for Lena," and "Shut down Sterling." Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation, the gallery packed with onlookers, their murmurs blending with the hum of fluorescent lights. Evan Brooks sat in the back row, his oil-stained work jacket replaced by a simple navy blazer, his 7-year-old daughter Amara beside him. She clutched a paper crane folded from a courtroom pamphlet, her small hands fidgeting as she watched the proceedings. A fresh red thread tied by Amara that morning hugged Evan's wrist, its soft cotton a quiet anchor against the storm of attention. He hadn't come for the spotlight, hadn't wanted any part of the media circus that had followed him since the night at Lumiere. But he was here for Nadia Carter, for the USB drive she'd risked everything to protect, and for the memory of Lena, whose death in a Sterling Properties fire had set this chain of events in motion. The courtroom was a battlefield of truth, and Evan was content to be a silent witness, Amara's hand warm in his. 6 weeks had passed since the confrontation at Table 12, where Evan had disarmed 3 of Sterling's fixers with a cracked porcelain spoon and a napkin, his calm authority captured on a live stream that now had 40 million views. The phrase, "Wrong, table wrong day, gentlemen," had become a rallying cry online, a meme emblazoned on T-shirts and coffee mugs. Nadia's Metro weekly exposé, fueled by the USB drive's evidence, had triggered a federal probe that dismantled Sterling Properties' empire. Today was the culmination, the final indictments against Sterling's executives, conspiracy, bribery, criminal negligence, resulting in death. Nadia stood at the podium beside the U.S. attorney, her voice steady as she outlined the charges. Sterling Properties knowingly violated fire safety codes, bribed city inspectors, and falsified housing records, She said, her words carrying the weight of a decade's worth of evidence. Their negligence cost lives, including that of Lena Brooks, who died in a boarding house fire 3 years ago. The gallery stirred eyes turning to Evan, but he kept his gaze forward, his hand steady on Amara's. The evidence was damning. The USB drive, now in federal custody, contained financial records, emails, and signed agreements proving Sterling's executives had paid off inspectors to overlook faulty wiring, inoperable sprinklers, and blocked exits in dozens of properties. The boarding house where Lena died was one of many, each a profit-driven death trap masquerading as affordable housing. The U.S. attorney displayed documents on a courtroom screen highlighting payments to city officials, including the former Lumiere manager who'd confessed to providing Sterling's fixers with private dining space for their business discussions. 17 indictments had been issued, with Sterling's CEO and board members facing up to a decade in prison. Protesters outside chanted Nadia's name, but she turned the focus to Evan. This case wouldn't exist without Evan Brooks, she said, her voice breaking slightly. He saw what no one else did and acted when it mattered most. Evan shifted uncomfortably, the red thread catching the courtroom's light. He hadn't wanted recognition, hadn't wanted his past as an Apex Solutions instructor dragged into the open. But Nadia's words and the weight of the evidence forced him to confront it. He'd spent years at Apex teaching operatives to diffuse crises without violence, writing the Calm First manual that became a standard for diplomatic security. After Lena's death, he'd buried that life, choosing the quiet work of fixing machines, gas sensors, emergency exits, kitchen equipment, because machines didn't betray trust or cut corners for profit. Yet, that night at Lumiere, his instincts had resurfaced, not for glory, but for necessity. Nadia had been in danger, and he'd been there, the red thread on his wrist, reminding him to breathe slow, to act with purpose. The gallery buzzed as the U.S. attorney called for victim impact statements. Nadia gestured to Evan, inviting him to the podium. Reporters leaned forward, cameras ready, expecting a speech from the viral hero who'd taken down Sterling's enforcers with restaurant supplies. Evan stood, Amara's hand slipping from his, and walked to the front. The room fell silent, the weight of expectation pressing against him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out one of Amara's paper cranes, this one folded from a newspaper clipping of Nadia's exposé. Then he untied the red thread from his wrist, the one Amara had tied that morning, and gently wrapped it around the USB drive, which rested on the evidence table. He placed the crane on top its white paper, stark against the black plastic. The symbolism was unmistakable, gentle protection, wrapped around hard truth, with hope perched above it all. He stepped back without a word, returning to Amara's side. The silence broke as Amara stood, her small figure dwarfed by the podium. "My daddy doesn't need to talk," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and unshaken. He already said everything with his hands. The gallery erupted in applause, camera shutters clicking like a storm. The image, red thread, white crane, black USB, became the defining photo of the case, spreading across social media with captions like "Calm, First Truth Always," and "When Heroes Don't Need Words." Evan pulled Amara close, his throat tight. She was his reason, his compass, the one who kept him grounded when the world tried to pull him apart. Outside, the media swarmed, but Evan and Amara slipped through a side exit, avoiding the cameras. Back home, their small apartment was a refuge filled with Amara's cranes and the quiet rhythm of their life. The boarding house where Lena died had been condemned, torn down, and replaced with a community garden funded by Sterling's bankruptcy settlement. Evan had taken Amara to see it, her small hand in his, as they watched workers plant the first flowers. "Is Mommy's place pretty now?" she'd asked. "Yeah, sweetheart," Evan had said. "It's safe and pretty." That was enough for her and for him. The aftermath brought changes Evan hadn't expected. His part-time consulting work had expanded with restaurants and hotels across Atlanta, hiring him to implement the Calm First protocol. He trained staff to spot distress, prioritize safety, and de-escalate without drama. Lumiere, now a model of safety, had doubled its business, its reputation rebuilt on the promise that every diner was protected. Evan's inbox still overflowed with job offers, security firms, talk shows, even a movie producer pitching a biopic. He declined them all, keeping his focus on Amara, on being home by 3:30 for school pickups, on fixing what was broken in ways that didn't make headlines. But the real lesson wasn't in the headlines or the indictments. It was in the quiet moments, like when Amara handed him a new crane each morning, or when a Lumiere server handled a tense situation with the skills he'd taught them. Courage, Evan realized, wasn't about grand gestures or viral moments. It was about seeing injustice and acting not for fame, but because it was right. It was about building a world where people like Lena, like Nadia, like Amara, could be safe. The Calm First protocol wasn't just a training manual. It was a way of life, staying steady, choosing protection over pride, and fixing what others ignored. One evening, as Evan tucked Amara into bed, she handed him a crane folded from a courtroom sketch she'd found in the newspaper showing him with the red thread and USB. "For tomorrow, Daddy," she whispered, her eyes heavy with sleep, "in case you need to fix something else." Evan slipped the crane into his pocket, the red thread warm against his wrist. Tomorrow would bring more maintenance calls, sprinklers, to test doors, to unstick systems, to keep safe. But tonight, he'd fixed something bigger. The idea that one person, even an invisible one, could change everything by saying, "Wrong table, wrong day," when it mattered most. The lesson was clear, and it was one Evan hoped others would carry forward. Courage doesn't require a uniform or a stage. It lives in ordinary people who choose to act, who see the overlooked, who protect the vulnerable. For Amara, for Lena, for every person who'd been failed by systems like Sterling's, Evan's actions were a promise that truth, handled with care, could rebuild what greed had broken. That promise was his legacy, stronger than any viral video, and it lived in every crane Amara folded, every red thread she tied, every quiet step he took to make the world a little safer, a little better, one fix at a time.